Kevin Hollenrink.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate, and I'd like to focus my remarks really on the work of SMEs in terms of driving economic growth. For me, they are absolutely, and we say often in this place, they are the engine room of economic growth more than anything else. Taking a step back from that, the most important thing in driving economic growth, the foundations of that are productivity, of course, which leads to prosperity, is more competition. Competition is very good for opportunity, but it's also very good for consumers. It drives down prices and drives up service. So absolutely, we should look at competition. In my view and my experience in business, when we started our business back in 1992, we were a state agency business. So we quickly got to a leading market share in our marketplace, and we're doing quite well. And in 2 or 3 years' time, we noticed lots of other for sale boards popping up all over the place and select boards, and new competition came in and was taking market share from us. We suddenly were no longer the new kids on the block, the people who got to number one. We were being pushed off our perch as the market leader. And it made us look at what we were doing and become more efficient, more effective, worked harder, and put a new package together so we could once again become market leaders. And this is the effect in competition, the driving force behind all those benefits for consumers we see from competition. That's how it works in reality. Well, very briefly, yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving away that point, and I think he's made a point about competition. Can I ask him what competition drives energy, water and rail? They seem to be natural monopolies, if I'm not mistaken. So perhaps you could tell me how the free market and competition helps drive down prices in those sectors.
Interesting, because energy distribution was very competitive in this country, if you remember. A huge expansion in the number of energy distributors, which led to a driving down of prices very, very effectively. Where they got caught out, of course, is the huge increase in wholesale costs, which drove lots of those people out of business. But that was an excellent example how competition does work and drives down prices for consumers and increases choice. So that's a good example. In terms of energy, people who produce source energy, I agree with him. There's not enough for those big producers, which is why we've got to be careful when one or two big companies dominate the marketplace. It was G.K. Chesterton who said, "Too much capitalism isn't too many capitalists, it's too few capitalists." And that's why we need to focus on competition. Make sure that the environment is very attractive to new businesses starting up and growing, SMEs. And that's why all our policies, to me, should focus on small businesses, not on big businesses. They can generally look after themselves. A couple of issues we have already in terms of, and we've got to look at the brutal facts when we look at this, I'm afraid. And I was a bit disappointed, as I said earlier, in terms of the Governor of the Bank of England, when he was talking to the Treasury Select Committee about some of the issues we're seeing in labour shortages, which is driving inflation, second-round inflation. We weren't looking at some of the issues SMEs are particularly experiencing in terms of accessing labour, because net migration in 2020, the year we have reliable data over, has dropped by 88% into the UK, from 271,000 people down to 34,000 people, net migration. Now, that is, people say that's a good thing, which wants to get a hold on immigration, and some of that may be COVID effect. But nevertheless, for SMEs, if you own a pub, a restaurant, or you're a farmer, all these are SMEs generally, they're finding life very, very difficult. So we've got to make sure there is an available supply of labour. And the other issue we've got in terms of is red tape at the borders, non-tariff barriers, they might be called, and that's causing problems particularly for SMEs. And we need to make sure, I think it's a 45% reduction in the number of SMEs exporting to the European Union. Those are facts we've got to confront and we've got to deal with. In terms of where we need to go in terms of levelling up, which is of interest to me particularly, representing the North, from the North and for the North, making sure we level up properly and make sure the opportunities are spread nationwide equally, it is a huge undertaking. The relative gap between the North East and London the South East in terms of productivity per capita, in relative terms, is as wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification. That took 30 years and $2 trillion to narrow that gap. This is the long haul. It's the right thing to do, but it's a long haul. We need to get the private sector to invest. That was a lesson from East Germany, get the private sector to invest. So certainly things like EIS and SEIS, equity investment to SMEs, vital. Those are due to expire in 2025. We need to see those measures extended. I would also like to see actually enhanced tax breaks for EIS and SEIS into businesses in the less well-off parts of the country to attract more investment capital into those areas. And the final thing I'll say, and probably the last minute I've got, Madam Speaker, is one thing that could make a massive difference. Lots of SMEs in this country will not borrow. 73% of SMEs would rather grow more slowly than borrow. Part of that because of the lack of trust between small businesses and big banks. In other parts of the world, where they have something called regional mutual banks, Germany is a good example, they expanded lending during the financial crisis. The UK, we contracted lending during the financial crisis, about 20% on either side. Regional mutual banks lend more into the economy at the key times. This could be a really good policy of driving SMEs forward in our regions. Thank you.
Tharmanjit Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is indeed a pleasure to follow my honourable friend, the member for Thirsk and Moulton,